can roll whenever. So. Oh, okay. I love it. Okay. Awesome. Thank you everybody for coming. I'm sure everybody has seen the title of the presentation. When we try to type it out in Outlook, it stops us before we send it and says, "Are you sure you want to say this in a, a business email?" The title of the talk was, "What the hell is Azure AD Smart Lockout?" Everybody probably knows that they rebranded to Microsoft Entra, and since I submitted the talk, their documentation actually switched to Microsoft Entra Smart Lockout, so kind of screwed me on that one. I wasn't going to reach out and change the talk title, but yeah, quick about me section. Director of Technical Operations and a hacker at Sprocket Security, Madison-based continuous penetration testing startup. I've been at Sprocket for about 5 years now. Been doing penetration testing and hacking on stuff for quite a while. The picture on the right, I'm a big runner, did 2,000 last year was my goal. JP from my team took this of me over Christmas week, so yeah, that was pretty fun. And then the only other thing that my whole team knows about, and I love them to death, 3 cats, movie, cricket, and goober. I keep my desk warm, and we're around for a lot of this, so that's kind of the spiel about me. So what are we talking about today? The quote up on the screen here, it's really long. You guys don't have to necessarily read it, but it's from the author of a tool called Trevor Spray that was built for password spraying O365. And when he built it, he wrote a little manifesto along with it in the README, and this was the top quote from it. And when I first read it, I was like, all right, this sums up every problem I've been having for the past couple of years. Basically, right, in the past, every pen test I hopped on, there was a Microsoft Exchange server. You even would use like Metasploit and hop in there and just password spray and land on an account and went from there. You know, it wasn't uncommon to go from nothing to DA in like a couple of days at an organization. And I'm sure some of the pen testers in here that have been around the bend can say that's true as well. What has happened, however, is this shift to O365 and cloud services has made password spraying much more difficult. So that easy, quick win that you used to get and the great hacker high when you woke up in the morning, you're like, oh, I popped an account, is kind of gone. It's much more difficult than it used to be, right? In the past, right, we were talking about password spraying Microsoft Exchange. Now things have changed pretty significantly. If anybody gets the reference in there, I appreciate you. Everything is SaaS. So one of the things that happened, right, if everybody remembers like proxy shell, I'm sure you guys do. When those guys went through and got RCE on 1,000 different Exchange servers, I bet they were really, really happy about it, but then kind of they're sitting today going like, oh crap, we can't password spray anymore. Like everybody is taking Exchange away, or they're taking ADFS off the internet. And so now everything is shifted to the cloud, of course, right? But you are, instead of doing this traditional authentication mechanism where you're talking to a ADFS server or something, and you get a cookie and you log in and it's directly authenticating you to the internal domain controller, you're working with Active Directory, you can do a bunch of fun stuff. Now you're playing with OAuth and there's a more complicated authentication mechanism there. And one of the other big things you'll see with password spraying nowadays is native detections built in. So anybody here who has hosted a server on-prem knows that if you were getting sprayed or password sprayed, your Microsoft Exchange instance, whatever it might be, you had to have an external SIM or some other solution to help you detect that that was occurring, and preventing it was very, very difficult due to kind of just limitations of those software solutions. Now, natively within Microsoft, right, it doesn't matter if you just have a base Microsoft license, you do get some protections and native detections like built right into what you're doing, even if you're not paying them money. It's better if you pay them money, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but that's where something called Microsoft Entra Smart Lockout comes in, and I promise I won't make you guys wait too many slides for me to talk about what it actually is, because I'm sure a lot of people in here haven't heard of it. First though, on an aside, I just want to talk about what password spraying looks like today. So attempting to guess credentials for just an organization anywhere, right, in the workflow that we go through. We choose one of the many tools that have been built, all of them with some extra features, some features lacking, some simple, some much more complex, some in C#, I don't know why. And but anything on the left right there, our team I think kind of trades between these. I've gone between them over the years. In the past it was just really we would use either Burp Suite to do password spraying, or you'd use Metasploit and the built-in modules there, and it was relatively easy. But now you have to use some additional kind of tools that are out there on GitHub. To actually start spraying, right, you have to generate a list of passwords. So the traditional like spring 2024 exclamation point, password 1, blah, 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 blah. The stuff that used to get you big wins back in the day, it still happens. You still land on accounts with that, but there are some things in Azure Identity Protection that makes it a little bit more difficult. So nowadays we have to get a little bit more creative with the passwords that we're actually spraying. One of the things I like to do is actually utilize like vacation spots. So like Mexico 2024 or something like that. Yeah, you get a better chance of landing on things. Collect and validate usernames, another piece of it, right? You don't want to be spraying accounts that don't exist. So that's another piece. Start your password spray and sit and twiddle your thumbs. You have to go a lot slower than you used to when you were spraying Exchange or something on-prem. The problem comes in, however, right, when we start triggering smart lockout. So a quick kind of aside for anybody who doesn't know in here, traditional Active Directory environments have a default account lockout policy that says if I guess 3 incorrect passwords for a user within a specific time frame, then lock that account out, make sure that account can't log in for a predetermined amount of time. I think by default it's like 30 minutes. When you're password spraying in the cloud, it's a little bit different. So that weird error message that I have up on the screen there, I posed that to Getzman as the title of my talk, just the error message, and he was like, no. That's the error that gets returned saying that an account is locked in Microsoft Entra. And what you'll see when you password spray pretty much with any tool along the side there, even if you've done all the preparations, you're going to start seeing that lockout message returned to you very, very frequently and without any sort of pattern like you would see with on-prem Exchange or something like that. So what is Microsoft Entra Smart Lockout then? Because it does cause a big problem for us. So if you go to Microsoft's documentation, there's a ton of, okay, there's one page describing what it is. In the documentation, they say explicitly, right, after 10 failed attempts, they will lock a user's account for 1 minute. That sounds terrible. That's worse than the on-prem Active Directory lockout policy. So why am I doing an entire presentation on it? They even say, right, like I said, like 1 minute, and then after you lock out an account, you have to, it's a minute, and then they slowly increase it after every subsequent failed login attempt happens, right? And this value and this stuff is not configurable unless you're paying for an Entra P1 license. Really, the only configuration options they give you is they say like, okay, you can change it from 10 to 5 or something like that. I think the number by default, just as a dumb trivia fact for everybody, is slightly lower in US government tenants. So maybe something's going on there, I don't know. When you scroll to the way bottom of the article, there's a tiny little paragraph, right? So when I first started seeing this error message working on these tools, I was like, what the hell is it? It's just saying the account's locked, but I shouldn't be locking accounts. When you scroll to the bottom, Microsoft explicitly says, right, in addition to Smart Lockout, we also protect against attacks by analyzing signals. I'm reading it verbatim, guys. Analyzing signals, including IP traffic and identifying anomalous behavior. When they see that anomalous behavior, malicious traffic, the bad login attempts or password spraying, they'll start to send this account locked message, right? So it's not indicative necessarily that you're actually locking out an account when you're password spraying. It's indicative in some way, shape, or form that they're catching you performing password spraying. So what does the spraying landscape look like today, right? So with that error message, trying to deal with that problem of smart lockout, because what ends up happening is we sit down, we password spray maybe 4 or 5 passwords, and then randomly users start to get marked as locked. We get that error message being returned to us, right? And so a lot of tool authors, just like everybody who's trying to build payloads to bypass EDR and things like that, they will try to build these evasion features into their password spraying tools so they don't have to deal with this. All right, well, accounts are randomly locked out now, and I keep seeing these lockout messages. It's increasing to more and more users. There are a ton of like evasion techniques built into all the tools that I showed off earlier, right? So one, and this is like a de facto common thing that you'll see in tools like Teams Filtration, CredMaster, it's pretty much nobody wants a tool that doesn't do this anymore, is source IP rotation. So when you're issuing those login requests, these tools want to make sure that you're coming from a different IP address every single time you attempt login. Even they'll go as far as to use something like I think most of them do, the AWS API gateway, where you're proxying your traffic through, and then you're changing your IP on every request that's coming in. Bad. But anyways, additionally, shuffling OAuth values. So I had a giant chunk of slides in here where I was talking about OAuth and how it worked and everything to kind of discuss what that meant, and then realized it would take another 30, 40 minutes to go through, so I pulled it out of the slide deck. But one of the things that people do, right, when you issue a login request to a cloud service, you request and with OAuth, you request access to a resource, and you also provide a client ID. That client ID basically says, like, this is the client, right? So like Outlook application, something like that, that's actually attempting the login. What a lot of guys will do, you see this, Go365 was one of the first tools to kind of implement it, and then it's been ported over to other tool suites. They'll rotate those client IDs to try to bypass some security control, who knows what. So that's another thing that makes spraying tools good. Nowadays, timeframes, this has been a thing for a very long time, even with on-prem Exchange and stuff, where you only password spray between 9 to 5 in the time zone of the organization that you're targeting. Just so a SIM somewhere will look at it and be like, okay, this looks legitimate, even though we're seeing 50,000 failed logins. Additionally, randomization is another thing that makes spraying tools good nowadays. Teams Filtration is the only one that does this semi-successfully, as far as I know, where not only are you trying to password spray, like you're randomizing the list of users. From a detection standpoint, if you password sprayed every user in alphabetical order, that'd be pretty easy to catch, right? But they also randomize the password that you're trying for each user in the spray to try to evade detection, that sort of thing. Also delays and jitters, right? So the amount of time you wait between each login attempt in a password spray is also something that's built into most tools. And then finally, username validation, making sure that a username is valid before you spray it. If I'm password spraying Acme Corp, right, and half of the users that are failing to log in are real users and the other half are fake, that's a pretty easy detection mechanism. Teams Filtration, again, really good tool, but that's the only one I know of that does this by default. Kind of expansion on tooling and what the kind of the favorites are nowadays. Spray Charles is one of my favorites. That's how I learned to code, is on that tool. It's still really great for on-prem stuff, but it has a pretty limited set of capabilities when it comes to targeting cloud services or SaaS platforms, but still pretty good. Smart lockout happens very, very quickly, right? CredMaster, another really good one. It's plugin based. It has can handle different authentication endpoints. Very easy to add that OAuth shuffling and things like that we talked about. But smart lockout happens very fast. And then finally, the favorite one of everybody right now, I think, and it's one of the ones we still use relatively frequently, is Teams Filtration from the Trusted Sec team. They have built-in username enumeration techniques. There's a built-in database, everything like that. And smart lockout still happens fast. So you can maybe get away with nowadays password spraying 6 to 7 users before you're seeing lockout messages every, 15, 20 users, even if you're spraying like an organization with 1,000 different users out there. So I did have the sad cat because it's C#, and basically it bums me out because I can't mod it or do anything with it because I don't know the language. So then, right, all of this information in mind, I like sat down and I asked myself, like, okay, what actually is Entra Smart Lockout? We have that tiny little description that it looks for anomalous behavior and blah, 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 blah. But is it heuristics? Is it something else? Do they have like a basic rule set that's basically kind of an expansion of things they did with ADFS, extranet Smart Lockout? I also had a ton of stuff in here on that, and I pulled it because it was quite a bit of content. Like, what the hell actually is it, right? And browsing for months, I ended up on a YouTube video with 579 views from 2020. And the presentation is actually about Azure Active Directory identity protection, but there is somebody who comes in maybe 10, 15 minutes in and nerd flexes about data science and basically reveals that it's actually using a supervised machine learning model on the back end. And in the past, right, they utilized heuristics to do this like password spraying detection. That's what they're showing on the table here. So indicators that password spraying might be occurring. They had those statically defined, and they looked at them and they said, right, this user only ever logs in from Windows 10 to a specific application with this IP address in this country. And so right out of the gate, even with heuristics models, just think back to what makes a good spraying tool. This is a screenshot from a presentation in 2020. They already have the little indicator that says, oh, wait, I have a laser pointer, guys, but it's not, barely. They are saying right from the get-go, even when they had heuristics models, that they are tracking the number of active sessions from a single IP as an indicator that a password spray is occurring, right, or a login attempt is anomalous. So right from the get-go, even before we talk about like this idea of Entra Smart Lockout as a supervised machine learning model, I want to call out to every penetration tester in here that using AWS API gateways is probably a bad idea. And that's kind of like a controversial opinion, I think, or at least one that like hasn't really, it's so commonplace now and it's worth kind of taking note of. But regardless, right, they have these kind of, they describe that, hold on, yeah. So then, like, as they dive further into it and talk about like how the supervised model works, they call out a few specific things. And I don't want to like over-explain machine learning models to anybody, but it's a little bit different than heuristics models in a case like this, because instead of having a set of features, instead, at least what they're claiming, I hope somebody tells me this isn't true, but what they're claiming is the machine learning model improves upon itself. So it looks for indicators that a password spray is occurring or an anomalous login is happening, a malicious login to an account is happening, and that has expanded over the years, presumably for the last 4 years since 2024, to actually have different patterns that it's looking at to detect password spraying attacks. One, they also called out a couple of other cool things. One, the source IP address stuff that I talked about, but they also place a very heavy weight on the familiarity of the device. So they actually look at the criteria around the device that's authenticating, like the operating system, the user agent. I'm assuming it's mostly just the user agent, and some other kind of characteristics. So they place a lot of weight on that. And then they also have capabilities, or at least they're claiming to correlate. So the example they show in the presentation is if you are password spraying a bunch of companies in Seattle and you're spraying Seahawks 2020 exclamation point, they claim that they have some way to correlate those two, like the geolocation of the password with the actual like, or geolocation, like attributes of the password, like football teams and that sort of thing. So they must have some big database somewhere. Theoretically, we all know that like security companies love to lie about the use of AI and ML, so take it with like a grain of salt. The other thing that they talk about, right, is and the thing that's even more important there to call out is they do have knowledge of the password that you're sending during the authentication attempt to a certain extent, right? So they probably have a hashed version of password 1 and password 2 and 3 and so on and so forth. And so one, because in Azure Identity Protection by default, you can't even set those passwords anymore as an end user. But also because they probably have a predetermined list of weak passwords that can be used. They are probably at least triggering failed login or at least like anomalous login behavior on a tenant specifically because of the use of like weak passwords and that sort of thing. Even more so, right, 2024 and a password would be indicative of a password spraying attack if all users are trying to log in with it, blah, blah, blah. So I asked myself, right, like, I don't like Microsoft Entra Smart Lockout. I want to beat this supervised machine learning model. I don't know if it's AI in a Tesla or what, but I saw one of those trucks in person the other day, and it's about the ugliest thing you've ever seen in your life, by the way. It's massive. But said to myself, right, now that I have this information, like, how do I actually beat this supervised learning model so we can password spray in perpetuity forever? That's the dream, like, because last year the dream was like, I get to fish everybody all the time forever and not have to worry about getting detected. And so what kind of dove in, asked ChatGPT for a little help, and found out like, okay, there's 3 methods for actually bypassing or circumventing a supervised machine learning model from an adversarial perspective. So, and that leads into adversarial attacks. So adversarial attacks against a supervised learning model, basically, if you understand the underlying model, an attacker could create inputs to replicate what a real user login looks like. So maybe the big question is, or the big problem is, like, our login attempts that we're trying with password spraying attacks, right, don't replicate user behavior well enough. Maybe we need to change the way we're doing this so it looks like a real user is logging in on every attempt, because then if the supervised model is exclusively trained on real login attempts, then we could potentially bypass it. Things like the passwords that you're using and that sort of thing also come into play here. But regardless, the second option, and probably the most fun one, but also the most illegal one on the list, is data poisoning. So in theory, if you created a tenant with thousands of users and had the valid passwords for all of them, you could spin up, I don't know, thousands of Lambda functions to issue billions of login attempts that are really weird and trick the model into actually accepting those as like, oh, these are trusted valid login attempts because these 100 different tenants are logging in this very specific way. Could be interesting. I mean, it'd be very fun to trick it into thinking that I don't know, all logins from Siberia are legitimate no matter what, as long as the IP is from there, something. And then model interoperability. I practiced that. I still probably screwed it up there. I have it written out phonetically on my slides here. So if the model, the idea here is if the model is too complex, there might be an edge case. So the supervised machine learning model might not be well-rounded enough to catch a specific situation when you're attempting to log in and trigger smart lockout. This one is cool. It would take a lot of effort and time, but that one's fun as well because you have to assume that there's some edge case that Microsoft has built out there, that some company is passing authentication on to them and it meets very specific criteria. Regardless, I looked at all of these and I said, like, all right, this is cool. I don't know what the hell I'm going to do with this because all of those look like they're going to take a lot of developers and time to make happen. And I'm a bad developer and I don't have a ton of time anymore. So kind of decided, like, okay, I'm just going to leave this as is and maybe let somebody else solve the problem. Then I read this. So an article from Microsoft came out, their threat intel group, on a group called Peach Sandstorm. Yeah, I love their new naming scheme that they're using for everything. But they basically said that this threat group, or Iranian threat group, successfully compromised thousands of accounts using the Go HTTP client header. So the default user agent header that sends with like the request library in Go and Tor IPs. And I just, wait, what? Like, maybe this machine learning model is junk. Like, maybe if this can result in compromised accounts, then there's something here to be found because that is like so low effort, it's crazy. At least use like an API gateway or something. Like, why are they using Tor IPs? But, or maybe they found the edge case there, I don't know. One of the things to note, right, that differentiates this from maybe a traditional penetration testing firm and how we are doing password spraying, or not necessarily Sprocket, but other penetration testing firms are doing password spraying. You have a limitation at a company or you have a limitation as a penetration tester to only password spray a single organization at once. Sprocket, we have it nice. We have a very large number of clients that we can spray all at the same time, which is conducive to really crappy kind of techniques like this. But regardless, right, I was like, I'm going to try to tackle this problem. I'm going to try to actually like beat the machine learning model, and kind of sat down and I was like, all right, what do I know about how it works right now? So, and this is all anecdotal, right? So one, realized, and I'm sure other pen testers in the crowd here will notice this, or have noticed this in the past, but if you lock out a single tenant at some point over a certain threshold, so let's say you lock out like 10% of the users, it doesn't go away. So you can password spray them again in a couple days, like let's say you stopped completely, but you're going to trigger smart lockout faster than if you did it fresh, brand new, like you hadn't done it or nobody had done it in months and years. And again, right, once you lock a single user in a tenant, it seems to be this exponential growth thing where the first round you spray password 1, you'll see one user locked out or triggering smart lockout, and then all of a sudden you'll see like 10, 20, like 50, and it'll just start to scale up very, very quickly. Another thing that we've noticed, and this is really more like broad about password spraying, but something to take into account, passwords aren't as weak as they used to be. Like I mentioned earlier with Azure Identity Protection, if you guys go home to your company's O365 tenant, you try to reset your password to password 1, it won't let you do it. Most of the time when we guess a credential that's weak, that's also in O365, it's because an IT admin somewhere set it to that. And this is a fact, right? Or if you spray the company name and like 24 or something, that's usually by the time I deliver the report, they're going, oh, that's the default password that the IT help desk sets when users have to get a new password or when they log in for the first time. Which I don't even know why you would, because Microsoft creates a password for you on account setup. But additionally, the more you emulate real-world login attempts, the better. So the more we mod these tools, or we look at tools that actually try to replicate real user behavior, Go 365, even Spray 365, which is a lesser-known tool. I could do like a whole talk on that too. Emulates real-world user behavior better or more, accurately. You lock accounts less, right? And then finally, right, and this is what I talked about on the previous slide, the more users you target across multiple tenants, the better. You seem to have a higher or a lower chance of triggering smart lockout when you're spraying 10,000 users versus 100. So I wanted to go ahead and like set a baseline. That font is smaller on the top. Went ahead and targeted Microsoft Graph. I'm sure everybody in here is like relatively familiar with it. It's just a way to interact with Microsoft Entra through an API directly. And you can password spray it relatively easily. And it's a pretty common methodology for doing it. Use the de facto methodology of rotating my IP addresses using the AWS API gateway, and used a 10-minute pause between each spray attempt. And I also randomized the users between sprays, right? So with that, right, I went across 20 plus companies trying this, and I have a thing at the end. I don't know if any of our customers are in the crowd, but I'm sorry and thank you for letting me password spray. What we wanted to know is how long it takes to trigger Entra Smart Lockout, and the base tests against those multiple organizations found that it takes around 825 attempts across those 100 users before you actually like started to get, okay, I'm gonna back up. To get to the point where 25% of the login attempts that were occurring issued like return to smart lockout, you had to try at least like 8 or so passwords. So if I'm password spraying, I have 8 unique passwords, or a list of 100 unique passwords or something. I'm targeting 100 users. By the time I tried 8 passwords during that password spray, more than 25% of the accounts would be locked out. So this graph is kind of terrible, but a little bit better. So like by the time, right, the right thing, right, just shows like how many passwords I was able to attempt before 25% of the users were marked as locked. The weird thing is that Sprocket, not actually us, and Memes LLC are paying for a P1. I know that for a fact. So Microsoft, and I know they didn't configure it either, so Microsoft might sprinkle a little something extra on there apparently if you're paying them more. I don't know, but so really we got to try about 8 passwords before they locked. This didn't matter. Like when I did some tests surrounding like how long the pause would be between those spraying attempts, got to the point where I was trying maybe like 24-hour pauses between them, and it was like it got a little better but not significantly, which is very indicative of like a machine learning model that's detecting something and marking your tenant as at risk or something and that sort of thing. At that point, right, I was like, start messing with tools. Like I started modding things, and it was like a nightmare when I wanted to write my own thing with that baseline and see if I could improve it. This logo is really weird, I know, but during my research last year, I found this library during my testing, right? As I started to build a tool, I thought of it, and I also thought that, hey, adversarial attacks are probably the best method, I guess, for bypassing Entra Smart Lockout, because I can't really poison the data set. I can't find the edge case, so maybe I can just try and see if I can get better numbers, I guess, during these tests, right? So the library hrrequests is basically a headless Chrome or scraping orchestration library that actually, it's built to navigate to a page, scrape data from Amazon, and maybe like build a data set or something like that. It has all these crazy bot evasion features built into it, that sort of thing. But it's also good at navigating to outlook.office365.com and entering a password and or a username and password and clicking login through the browser versus all of these other tools that are doing it using the Microsoft Graph API or other like programmatic endpoints. What I ended up building was a tool called One Try. It's turned into few tries at this point, but the idea with it, at the beginning at least, was I wanted to do this out of AWS Lambda because I thought there might be a edge case there as well. Whole nother tangent, but ended up building a tool that used hrrequests, that library, and subsequently headless Chrome for evasion. So whenever you, IP warming features, that is really interesting. We'll talk about that in a moment here. Always, the tool that I set out to build, right, always password sprayed valid users. So whenever a login attempt would happen with this tool or this theoretical tool, the user that we were attempting to log in as would always be valid. We checked prior. So even if you're spraying a company for weeks and weeks and weeks, if that user got deactivated for whatever reason, you're not all of a sudden going to be password spraying a inactive user. Also implemented some form of endpoint randomization in the tool. So instead of doing that client ID and OAuth shuffling specifically focused on actually targeting like browser-based authentication endpoints. So if you go into go to your browser, private browser, and go to teams.microsoft.com, you'll notice that you're redirected to login.microsoftonline.com, which is your OAuth 2 or SSO provider. You log in there, and then you get access to that resource that you originally requested. So that initial request for a resource like Teams, the tool also had to randomly choose those resources to request access to. When I show you guys a video here in a minute, it's going to make a lot more sense. Also doing some user and password shuffling, and I'm not going to release it, so don't even ask. But One Try, right, this is kind of everything I just talked about already, but dove in, decided to build this tool, got to a pretty good point with it, right, but I'm just going to show you guys the video right from the get-go here. So, yeah, I'm just going to skip right to it. Yeah, this is JP's account. So what the tool will do, right, this is it running in not in headless mode. It'll actually choose a random endpoint, launch a browser, and then, this is not me typing, I promise. It's actually code typing. It'll take from a list of usernames and actually go ahead and enter the password and attempt to sign in. One of the benefits here that is really, really cool, so regardless of the, so I don't know if anybody saw, there was research from TrustedSec very recently around the error codes that are returned during login attempts. What they found is one error code out there actually indicated a valid login attempt, even though all the tools out there thought they didn't. This methodology for password spraying just looks for a cookie in the response. So it doesn't matter what error code is being returned. It doesn't really care about any of that information, right? So ended up building this, then scaled it out, right, to actually go ahead and do it headlessly, which wasn't too much of a change, but we also have features like, oh, that's not looking great. Also have features like validation of the user before we actually issue the password spray, things like pre-authentication. So I talked about earlier in one of the slides, Microsoft has this, these detection mechanism surrounding how many valid login sessions are occurring from one IP. So the ideology behind that would be, right, if I'm at a company and I'm exiting over a VPN, maybe 100 different users are logged in because they're all in the office authenticating. So if there's only one fresh login session from this IP or there's none, it might rank my risk score. And so what I built into the tool de facto, right, is before, if you want to, before every login request that happens to O365 from this list of random endpoints, it'll attempt to log in using valid credentials that I provide prior to actually logging in to warm up the IP addresses that you're using, right? Quick breakdown of the actual code itself. This is pretty small though. So the actual, oh shoot. Hold on. Okay, so actual code itself is pretty short. The thing that we have at the top there, anybody that has worked with probably any form of headless Chrome will kind of recognize it, so you have to initiate the actual browser session. HRequest has some features in it like mock human to actually replicate user behavior, so Microsoft, even if they have detections built into the login.microsoft.online page, they still, this is actually trying to type at a random, frequency and also like move the mouse and do things like that. Additionally, right, the code gets a little bit more simple here though, is we just launch the page, choose a random endpoint. After that, we find the selector in the actual web page and enter the username. This is some goofy JavaScript eval stuff that had to happen to actually support weird setups, and then also have a JavaScript eval built in to actually determine if the account is being triggered as locked, entering of the password, and storing the attempt if we're successfully logging in or not. So if you went and looked at like normal password spraying code, they're basically just, it's basically just like Python requests actually issuing, a request to a Microsoft endpoint, sending a username and password, and checking what error code gets returned. This is a little bit more broad, and it also replicates user behavior much better. So instead of hitting an API endpoint as Jay Gomez at sprocketsecurity.com and logging in, instead you're actually, from Microsoft's side, you're seeing a browser get launched and logging in through what looks like a Edge browser on a Microsoft Windows system, and so on and so forth. So you're really, when you go into the Microsoft Entra logs, you'll see with this tool, it looks completely legitimate. Nothing looks weird about the login attempts outside of the failed, attempts that are happening as part of password spraying, right? Where are we at today with the tool? I really wanted to get this ready to like release for this talk. It's a lot harder than I thought. As of right now, we have definitely with the framework there, and I can kind of show it off a little bit too if we have the time, but with the framework there, we are able to successfully reduce the time to trigger smart lockout. So this full user behavior replication feature set is taking it from maybe around like 8 password attempts to trigger smart lockout at 25% of the users, up to maybe like 12 to 15 or something like that. I'm not seeing methodologies, or I'm not seeing a method right now to actually reduce the, I guess, the amount of time that they trigger that tenant as at risk, but regardless, it's private for us currently. I do have some partial database support as well, so a little bit, a built-in feature set to actually store password spraying attempts over time specifically. Does crash every couple of hours because headless Chrome is not very fun. It's pretty, it'll leave itself open in the background, and it'll crash EC2 instances and things like that, so it's been a little bit difficult, but in the future, right, we do want to scale it up so we can spray a very large number of users. I do want to release it to just target a single user, so with some limited feature sets at one point, but it's a really good kind of framework, and I guess it was a learning opportunity for me as well, because one of the struggles that we'll see, right, if somebody shifts to another identity provider like Okta, OneLogin, something like that, this methodology is possible. You can definitely still password spray other companies and services, and I'm assuming it's going to work the same everywhere else. Also, I've always thought it'd be really cool to build a web front end for password spraying and things like that. So hopefully that'll come in the future as well. So usually people throw the remediation slide at the end where they talk about like, here's how you can prevent password spraying and things like that. But I actually want to help attackers here a little bit for a minute and explain like how you can improve password spraying today until I get my butt up and actually get the tool working to a point that I can release it. One, try to make your login attempt look real. So anybody who's doing password spraying out there, there's 2 user headers that Microsoft will accept without question that I found during testing, right? So if you send X client OS and X client CPU as headers in your request as your password spray, Microsoft will say, if you tell it it's Windows 10, it will trust it as Windows 10 when you go into Microsoft Entra. It'll just see it and trust it, and so you're better able to kind of replicate that user behavior specific device. Same goes for CPU, so if you're trying to spray as Mac OS systems, you can specify that and specify ARM, and it'll just blindly accept it. That works pretty well. Modify your tools to randomize authentication endpoints. Don't, of course, spray every single endpoint under the sun for password spraying, but instead pick like a small set of like teams.microsoft.com, outlook.office.com, so on and so forth, things that users commonly log into. The guys who are spraying with OAuth values that are hitting Yammer and logging in and things like that, it's not going to help you with the supervised machine learning model that's being trained on common use cases. Don't use AWS API gateways. It's hard to accept because it's really, you're going to hurt no matter what. Proxy Cannon is a tool that'll rotate your IPs, but not to the extent of the API gateway, which can be kind of helpful here. But more than anything, even if you want to spray from a single IP, warm your IPs up. So write a tool, or we have some tooling that will just sit on a brand new box and log in 200 times with a legitimate account to different endpoints, and then that IP is much more trusted by Microsoft than if you were going to password spray from just random IPs that have never been used before. And scale your user base. This is a little difficult for most penetration testing firms. If you can spray a very large number of users at once, the chance of locking out accounts is much lower. That's my highest rate of success. So the only way that a lot of traditional pen testing firms can do this is if you're on a team and you're working different organizations and you're using some form of tooling to password spray. Don't each individually do password spraying. Use the same database to do it. So spray all of the companies at once and introduce them to the database. So you're all, all these companies are in the mix versus a single organization, because what we learned kind of going through this is that once a tenant gets marked as dead or at risk, right, the chances of locking out accounts goes up significantly. From a remediation perspective, however, one option is to give Microsoft a little bit more money and pay for a P1. You can do some customization and have some additional security features built in that'll allow you to protect against, like, if accounts get compromised at least. So you can't necessarily stop password spraying if people are beating smart lockout at some point, but you can kind of reduce risk around account compromise itself. So when we do guess a password, for strong passwords, Microsoft has things like password banning, so you can ban certain keywords that are specific to your organization. So by default, right, if your tenant name is Acme, it'll ban Acme. But if you have an internal product or tool or offering that you guys offer that might be common in passwords, also ban that in there. Can be very, very useful. Use real MFA. So one of the things here is, like, when we guess a password, most people go, well, what about MFA? You can bypass it, like, a decent amount of the time. So, like, the thing to take into account here, like, everybody's saying go to hardware keys, go to pass keys, but actually try to work towards it. And definitely don't allow users to use multiple forms of MFA. What we'll see quite a bit is, like, all right, we guessed a credential, we can't push spam the user or something along those lines, but they also have SMS-based MFA set up. They also have phone-based MFA set up. Don't let them do that. Just restrict it to the Microsoft Authenticator app and then train your users surrounding that instead of introducing all this kind of additional complexity. And then finally, another option is choose another identity provider, cough, cough, Okta, something like that. A lot more expensive though, and not super viable for a lot of companies. And yeah, credits, all the tools I played around with forever. We use these all the time. They're free. And if you haven't looked at them, look at them. They're great. There's a lot of great work that has went into them, and hopefully I can get something released here soon that'll actually trump all of these, but I don't know when that'll happen. Sprocket clients that know who they are. I've gotten several emails that, hey, are you guys testing us right now, sort of thing. And it's definitely been us, because I've just been password spraying constantly all the time for the past few months, trying to irk out data sets and test out tools and everything here. And then some tool authors that I really like. NixGeek, I didn't talk about the username enumeration methodology that I had in one try here because I'm at about 55 minutes already. But he's done some really cool stuff. Look up OneDrive enum, stuff like that. Really, really awesome. Techromancer, who with his manifesto kicked off this whole idea in my head and made me dive into all this stuff. And Navsec, who's the author of Credmaster that I've contributed to quite a bit. And then big thanks to team at Sprocket. Honestly, I love these guys. I get to work with them all the time, bounce ideas off of them. Nate, who's at the bottom, isn't here with me, and Justin was, I think, out of office for this one, unfortunately. But one of my favorite pictures of all of us together. Shelby, my girlfriend, who's listened to this talk probably 4 or 5 times now, so kudos to you. And also cats who keep my desk warm all the time. So. Yeah, that's it, guys. I appreciate it. Great. Any questions?
Do you have any more insights on the IP reputation warm-up and how to approach that, how effective that really is?
Yeah, so I'm not 100% certain. One of the things I tried during testing was to actually utilize like residential proxies for this. So IPs that might even be a little bit more trusted than others. Didn't seem to help significantly. I have seen more success when I do warm up an IP though. So what I'll generally do, right, is to take the length of the user list that I'm going to be targeting, times it by 2, and log in that many times with legitimate accounts. It seems to help. It's very anecdotal. The data set that you have to build to like support that is quite difficult, and I've been struggling with it a little bit, but based on at least like what they talked about in their presentation, like it does play a decent part into what they're doing, and I'm relatively certain at least that the API gateway is not helping us. That's for sure. So yeah. Yes, yeah, definitely. So I do think they didn't specifically call this out during the talk, but like I think they are doing some level of training or like criteria creation on each individual tenant themselves. So instead of having this one monolithic machine learning model that's working for the billions of login attempts they're processing, instead they probably have a set of criteria that are assigned to a single tenant, and then they say like 75% of these users log in from this IP every single day because they're connecting to a VPN. This base OS, another one that is impossible to emulate is the machine like bound to Azure AD and so on and so forth. So there's definitely some more specific IP like modeling that happens per tenant for sure, I think. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
This is probably like to be assumed, but before you actually start your password spray, are you looking for any breach credentials from a company first, or?
Yeah, so asked if we're looking for any breach credentials before we do password spray. It's something we'll look for. Services like Dhashed have made credential stuffing and things like that a lot easier, but most organizations, even though they probably shouldn't, have password rotation policies. So you might get lucky once in a while, but more often than not, we aren't. I think I can remember one instance where it worked for me. That doesn't mean never try it, but it's not nearly as common as it used to be, I think. So yeah, definitely. Any other questions? Yeah.
Can you go a bit deeper on like the user like validation of whether they're active or not prior to the spray?
Yeah. So I don't want to. You asked making like the user validation process and how you make sure the user exists prior to. So there's a ton of methodologies for doing this. And the one that I'm using is very specific to the research from NixGeek, which I want to credit him 100% for it. He found a endpoint in SharePoint for Microsoft where if you hit it with a very specific format and URL centered around that user, if the user has ever utilized SharePoint or OneDrive specifically at any point, which even if you're like, we don't use OneDrive, if you ever send an email with a document in it, you technically use OneDrive, blah, blah, blah. If you send a head request to this specific URL with that user in there, if they're legitimate, they'll return a different status code than they would, if they were illegitimate. It's not a perfect science. There's also methodologies for doing it with Microsoft Teams and also just the O365 login endpoint in general as well. So like if you go type a username into login.microsoftonline.com and it doesn't exist, it won't redirect you to the password page. So you can programmatically do that as well to validate usernames. Okay. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Awesome. Oh, yes.
Of the non-intra IDPs, what have you had the next highest success with other IDPs, whether it's ping,
Yeah. None of them, honestly. One of the things is like I don't see them that often. Okta isn't terribly common across like our customer base, so I don't go up against it too often. When it comes to like success rate, it's usually when you revert, right? So you go to like on-prem installations is where I end up having the most success. So yeah, long story short, like I don't password spray Auth0 or Okta or OneLogin or anything that often. So I can't answer it super accurately, but I know that even the guys who have spent a ton of time on this, Okta gives them hell. So, and it's given me hell in the past. So I'm assuming they use something similar to Microsoft, but a little bit better, that sort of thing. So, yeah. Awesome. Yes?
Are you splitting up your attack so that you're doing like the user validation piece or verification piece like from a different looking origin?
Yeah, so for the user enumeration piece, because it is just a head request to a completely separate endpoint, I do it right in tandem with the login attempt. So even though it's the amount of analytics that they're collecting on that head request is like nothing in comparison to what they're collecting heuristics-wise and for that model when you're actually authenticating. So the ideology has been like, I can just do it right in line. Alternatively, we have other tools that will just do it as well, like separately. So like it's, you know, if I was making a login attempt and then making a login attempt to do that username validation process, like I would definitely consider, you know, separating them out. But because it's a completely different endpoint and that sort of thing, completely separate endpoint, like I haven't worried about it too much. Yeah, awesome. Okie doke. I think that's about it. So, cool. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.